So we're from AARP, so I have to say, Connie, be proud of that large font, because aging is a good thing. So we are going to talk to you a little bit about our experience effort that we started about 2.5 years ago. But I wanted to, some folks don't really have a strong sense of what we do at AARP, so I'm just going to take 2 quick minutes to put some context around what you'll be hearing. We are coming up on our 60th anniversary, and we were started by a retired principal who identified the need for retired teachers to have health insurance. And we have insurance products that are co-branded today, but our breadth of offerings is much greater than that. And I'll go over a few of what those are. But our goal is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And we work around the sense that your opportunities should not be diminished as you grow older, but should grow greater and greater. And we do that. Most people we're known for our discounts, of course, and our co-branded products. But we do a significant amount of advocacy work, both on the state and local level, where we're pushing for caregiving support, healthcare, financial security, livable communities, those sorts of things. And we do a fair amount of research in our public policy department on aging issues, things like age discrimination, that sort of thing. So, the 50-plus consumer. I'm going to show you all some information that we used internally to build a bit of a burning platform for our experience effort. And this is to drive what we call engagement with our offerings to further our social mission. So why is that important, especially for a nonprofit? So we first note that the experience expectations of the 50-plus consumer are outpacing companies' ability to implement those experience improvements. So if you all have been in this experience game for a while, 5 years ago, you may go to an experience conference and it was like a handful of people, or maybe 100 so, like in this room. It is standing room only, and Gartner identified it as the #1 investment area for Fortune 500 CEOs. So everybody is in this game. So at the same time that we're putting heavier and heavier investments in place, the expectation of the consumer is getting higher and higher. And we find that for the 50-plus consumer, similar trends that we do for younger consumers. These are savvy consumers. They are engaging with brands like Apple and Amazon and Zappos. And these organizations are setting a really high bar for the expectations that consumers have when they interact with an organization. So for AARP, as you saw with our breadth of offerings, people also often say, Michelle, who are your competitors? And I want to say in the experience realm, it doesn't matter. Our competitors are anybody who these folks are engaging with who set an expectation for what it means to interact with a consumer. And lastly, we needed to debunk a bit of a fallacy for the 50-plus consumer that they lag in terms of like technology use and sort of consumer savviness. They are everywhere that everybody else is. So that's a little bit of background. We do also share certain principles that we take from other organizations, right? So we often highlight and look at best practices of Zappos and say, when a consumer is engaging with Zappos, they set the bar for what easy is. They also set the bar for what it means for an organization to trust its consumers. If anybody here uses Zappos, you know that you can get your right size before you return the wrong size. And that is what consumers are expecting from them. They're engaging with Lyft and Uber. And so they set the bar for what is timely. So for us, this is really important in how we get our materials to our members. When you can get a ride in 5 minutes, it sets this I need a fast response, and I expect you to be able to do so. Netflix sets the bar for personalized, and we take a cue from them in terms of what it means to understand your consumer, understand the behaviors that they are tracking across your organization, and use that information to tee up relevant information and not do historically what we've all done, which is this spray and pray model where you just give it to them all and hope something sticks. They expect you to understand who they are and to learn and know more about who they are, and a lot of that can be attributed to both Netflix and Amazon. And lastly, the Ritz-Carlton, which is a little bit of a stretch for us, but we try to take a cue from them in what is intentional. So they orchestrate, like Disney, every single aspect of the interaction and leave nothing to chance and nothing to happenstance. So we look at organizations like this, we show organizations like this internally in our organization to drive this culture of consumer obsession and consumer focus. And we spend a lot of time studying these organizations. We also spend a lot of time showing folks sort of just the general importance of an effort like this. So we know that best-in-class experience organizations, those users are 6 times more likely to forgive when something goes wrong. They are 7 times more likely to engage or buy more, and 15 times more likely to recommend. And I know, speaking to this audience, you all are very aware that we live in the world of an empowered consumer. If somebody is unhappy, it is very easy for them to make that known and for that to have some serious ramifications for your business. So, as I said, 2.5 years ago, we worked to stand up the experience function, and our goal, as we stated, is to ensure a positive consumer experience in every single interaction with AARP. It is hard for our employees sometimes to understand that that is not customer service, that it is not a matter of just optimizing the call center and web experiences, that it is a matter of optimizing every event, every engagement, every interaction, every channel, every direct mail piece, every commercial advertisement. And so that orchestration is what we stood up the function to better optimize. When we set about this work, we did a lot of homework to identify our guiding principles or North Star. And we had to figure out who we wanted to be, what the experience wanted to feel like. We know that experience is a function of emotion and perception. And so we first had to define what is the emotion and perception that we want our users to come away with. And we landed on 3, effortless, gets me, and inspiring. So the first is, if I could see it, effortless. And that's this notion that engaging with our organization should be intuitive and it should be simple. I will say that before we took this to consumers to understand if we had permission to be effortless, it started off as easy. And what we heard was AARP actually deals with some pretty complex issues. Medicare is not easy. Social Security and figuring out when to pull that benefit, it's not easy. And so they're not expecting that we take these complex issues like caregiving and make them easy to digest. But they are expecting them to be simple. They're expecting the steps to be obvious, and they're expecting it to be intuitive. And we have a lot of work to do. A lot of that shows up in this year as we work to figure out how to be more seamless across our channels, so that when you call in the call center and you're on the website or what you get in your direct mail, all sort of is orchestrated in this beautiful sort of symphony, as opposed to they don't know me, they don't know what's going on. Gets me. Close cousin of effortless. So gets me is this notion that AARP has an understanding of who I am. As I mentioned, we have a lot of products and services and benefits, and not everybody wants everything. Some folks just want our magazine, and it's up to us to understand that. So this is largely a data play for us, and we have a lot of work to do to ensure consistency in data and infrastructure to allow us to pay off on this. So if you are searching on our website, we need to know where you're searching. If you've called the call center, we need to have that reflected in your web experience and so forth. And so that requires us to share data across the organization, so that every business unit has access to it and can pay off on what we're learning. Lastly, inspiring. And for us, this is unique. I will say, I think effortless and gets me are sort of table stakes, and you see a lot of experience functions focusing on those 2 aspects or principles. Inspiring is unique to AARP. As I mentioned, we are an organization that focuses on the possibilities of the 50-plus consumer, and that your experiences should open to you. And so we have these gorgeous ad campaigns that really kind of speak to that, and that you can reimagine your life after 50. And so our interactions and the experiences that you have with AARP should also feel like that, right? And so even your membership materials should feel inspiring. If you're dealing with a tough issue like the loss of a loved one, there are things that we can do that will make that inspiring. And so we also pay very close attention to make sure that that too is felt in all of our communications. So how we work. As I mentioned, when we stood up the experience function, we spent a lot of time thinking about how are we going to sort of identify the right things to focus on and get started. How in the world do we get started? And so we stood up our function around 4 key tracks. The first is what's called insights and listening. And we have a best-in-class voice of the consumer program that pulls every mention of AARP on the web. It pulls from our Facebook pages, our Twitter pages. We record calls into the call center, and we pump it into a text analytics system. So at any day, I can tell you the topics that people are talking about as it relates to AARP, and I can tell you the sentiment of those topics. So are these folks happy or are they mad about something? And so we spend a lot of time listening to those insights and figuring out where we need to hunt, what's on fire, and what we need to fix immediately. We also work this year to stand up a baseline NPS score, so we can measure our impact as we go forward. And so that was really the effort and continues to be the effort of the insights and listening track. Strategy and governance, which is led by me, really focuses on taking all that information, understanding the politics of the organization, level of effort of certain things, who's an eager business unit partner versus who may be more difficult. And I work to say, okay, these are the opportunity areas that we're going to prioritize. At that point, we pass things over to Salika's team, and you'll hear from her next. And they focus on the design. So taking sort of what is broken, what we have identified, and doing the magic that Salika will talk about to making it, to reorchestrating it and rethinking what that experience should be. We also have deploy, and I know this isn't something that all organizations have, but it was necessary for AARP. So there are beautiful designs that come out of the design group that reimagine what the experience could be. But we really wanted to put a lot of muscle into actually implementing and executing those designs. So we made the investment to stand up this deploy track to make sure that that happens. So deploy works with the IT department, they work with the web, the direct mail, to make sure that the beautiful designs that Salika's team is putting in place or has come up with can actually be put in place. So I talked a little bit about the prioritization process and wanted to give you a sense of how we make that happen. So we have this opportunity assessment model. So my team is constantly collecting intake forms from across the building and from the Voice of the Consumer department. So from the Voice of the Consumer department, that's what our members in the 50 plus are saying. So that is pure consumer-driven insights. But we also want to acknowledge that our employees also have a really good sense of what is broken and what can be repaired. And so anybody across our organization can reach out to me. We do an intake form. What is the consumer issue? What is the benefit to the consumer of repairing this? Estimated level of effort, any additional information, and we monthly sit down and go through this with our entire team and make decisions on what we're going to prioritize. So we're working really hard to pay off on what we're hearing from the consumer, but also leverage the rich insights that our employees have about what needs to be tackled. We establish scope, we establish a team to go off and handle it. And so with that, I will turn things over to Salika, who can give you some examples about some things that we've been able to put in play.
Thank you. If it's okay, I'm going to kind of stand here. Is the mic on?
I think so.
Yeah, it is. Okay. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about repairing experiences and ultimately the tension that happens when you have that challenge. And I'm assuming many of you probably struggle with this. There's always a question of, okay, I'm going to deliver a better experience, but usually that comes at a cost. And can I benefit from cost savings when that happens? Is it possible to generate more revenue when that happens? Or is in fact the goal really just to improve the experience? And this is a tension that we have certainly at AARP. I can imagine that many of you, as you start to think about improving experiences and delivering better experiences, you may have these same type of questions. You know, can you design better experiences and simultaneously cut costs? Is it possible to generate revenue? Should you really invest in a better experience? I'm going to give you an example of a project we're working on right now that will require significant investment from AARP, but the experience is light years ahead of where it is today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about really how do you benefit and track and determine what is the ROI for a better experience. And which button is it?
Green. So it should work.
There we go. I've done that before. So I'm going to share with you one experience that we tackled very early on when the team was initially stood up. I tried to come up with a better title, but there's really no better way to explain this particular experience and the process. As you can imagine, AARP, we have 38 million members, all of which are 50 and over. So every year, approximately 3% of our membership passes away. Every year. That's almost 1 million people. So as you can imagine, going back to what Michelle was saying around how experiences should be intentional, and really when it comes to designing, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to create an intentional experience. The reality is, it was not a very intentional experience at AARP. So if you were a loved one of someone that passed away, you would typically go to aarp.org, or maybe you would get a hold of the 800 number and you call and say, hey, someone's passed away. I want you to stop mailing them, because at this point you're probably receiving a lot of mail. We had not really designed that experience. And so what happened internally is that basically what we would do is we'd have approximately 200,000 people or so reaching out to us annually. They were typically calling into the contact center. They would try on the website, but they typically could not find the right things to do, who to call, what to do, etc. And often what we would find is that when it came to voice of the customer, the negative sentiment around this particular experience was one of the top negative elements of our experience. So here you are, you basically have someone, a loved one, who's basically trying to figure out how to cancel membership. We have all this mail coming from AARP, coming from our providers, et cetera, and we've not really been intentional about what that looks like. They could very often call, end up on hold. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is that the contact agents, which was very, at the time, it made a lot of sense. They had a lot of resources that they would give to people, but they would ask them to go get a piece of paper and write down all these phone numbers you need to call your life insurance and all these other people, all these other providers that we have. And so they would literally have people on the phone with a pen and paper trying to write down all this information. So that was the current state experience. So let me talk a little bit about how we work, and when Michelle talks about just human-centered design and designing better experiences, we really do try to use a human-centered design approach. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this type of approach, but the gist of it is that we try to bring the consumer into the actual designing of a better experience. And so we basically use kind of a 4-step process. I won't go into a lot of detail, but in general, what we do is first just really understand what the problem is. So the particular example I just gave you, the very first step was to understand, well, how is this currently working today? What are the current processes? How do people feel about it, et cetera? Just really penetrating the problem. Secondly, we then try to workshop solutions. And this is really, really important, particularly if you're looking to stand up a customer experience team. It is critical that you engage and bring in the rest of the organization. It does not help for me and my team of 6 or 7 people to design a wonderful experience, and the organization and the teams and business units that deliver that experience have had little to no say in what that new experience will look like. So very often we're bringing in teams, we kick off a project, we do some initial consumer labs, and then we do ideation. And we do that again across the organization. Lastly, what we do in that particular phase is we go back out to consumers to say, hey, this is what we're thinking. How do you feel about it? To get them to just validate that it makes sense. Like, yeah, you're on track or you're not. This is the next part of this is actually, I think, really, really important, which is to iterate. And I'll be honest with you, most organizations struggle with this part. It is very easy to come up with an idea in a room or even talk to consumers and immediately move to deploy, as Michelle was saying. Go ahead and, okay, let's roll it out. And what we've learned over time, and this is really part of human-centered design, is it's really better to iterate. Just try a little scrappy version of what you're talking about, put it out there, get some reaction, and refine it. And then lastly, what we do is we then move to more of a pilot. And a pilot really is intended to operationalize the idea. So it's one thing to design it. It's another thing to say, can we internally operationalize this? Can we actually do it? Can our contact center make the calls or do whatever it is that we're asking of them? So just quickly, I want to talk a little bit about just this whole idea of investment, because we're talking about return on investment for experiences. And what we, again, are trying to do when we're designing and repairing broken experiences is what we're trying to do is iterate to reduce risk. As you're repairing experiences, it's great to make an investment, but you also want to make sure that it's the right investment. So very much like I was sharing with you in terms of how we work, we very often start with what are the consumer needs and just a broad idea or a solution. In that particular case, the investment is pretty low. You might be talking about a couple of focus groups or something like that. Then we might move to, okay, let's now take this idea and actually put it into market. And one of the things we've done, one of our other projects, so you may see us around DC, Maryland, Virginia area, is we actually went to locations where our consumers might be, set up a lemonade stand, gave away free memberships, and actually tested the experience in exchange for feedback. So that's another way that you can basically iterate, refine, and understand really what this new experience should look like. At the point where you start to get to piloting and operationalizing, at that point, we're investing millions of dollars very often in a new experience. But at that point, hopefully, we've really refined it and we know better in terms of what really would and should work. So let me go back to the example I shared around supporting loved ones of deceased members. And I'll share with you some of the things that we did to make it better. So one of the things that we did was that we, updated our website so that the search on the website and on Google actually created the right landing page. Unfortunately, what was happening early on is that if you typed in deceased member or someone has passed away, it actually put up an article of a corpse. And it was an article about corpse, and because you typed in deceased member. And so it was a very insensitive article, as you can imagine. So one of the things that we did was we optimized how you search when you go online. We also created a dedicated number. And so typically when you would do that, instead of calling the generic AARP number, you'd go to a dedicated line. It was the same contact center, but it would bypass the, press 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. What was happening when they were doing that is they were getting a lot of promotional information, right? So again, you're dealing with the stress and the grieving of a loved one passing away, and you're hearing commercials about, Dunkin' Donuts or go to Denny's, et cetera. And so it now bypasses that and goes directly to a trained staff who's basically been trained to talk to people about canceling their membership. Another thing we did was we actually created resources that we could email and or mail directly to people when they called. So that did a couple of things. Number one, it reduced the call time for those contact center agents, because now instead of saying, hey, go get a pen and paper, I'm going to give you all these phone numbers and places to call, we could actually just mail or email that directly to them. So as you can imagine, in terms of really the return on investment, we did actually see a good amount of cost savings. We were able to reduce call center, the contact center hold time. We were also able to reduce mailings, because at this point now we're stopping all the mailings that were coming for well up to a year very often for these members. So we definitely were able to see a return on investment for this particular experience. I think it's important to note, however, that it's not always going to be the case. I think we're very fortunate in this particular situation that we were able to see a return on investment. Along those lines, I'd like to share with you an experience that we're working on now, and I'll go over it briefly. And you may see this, and particularly if you're joining AARP coming up very soon, we're actually working on a new experience when it comes to becoming a member. So the way that you receive your new member benefits information is all these items that you see here on the bottom of the slide. So the magazine, your card, your benefits guide, maybe your premium. Today, all of those things come separately. They come at different times, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. And so as you can imagine, as a member, you've just joined, and sometimes reluctantly, I'll be honest, sometimes people reluctantly say, I guess I have to join AARP. And so you reluctantly join, and then over the course of 2 to 6 weeks, things just kind of sprinkle into your home via the mail. So what kind of welcome experience is that? So what we're doing now, we're well into the iterate phase on this particular project. What we're doing now is we're turning that into a moment of delight. So instead of reluctantly joining AARP, you're now going to receive all of those things in one nice package. We're trying to figure out what that packaging is. Again, going back to how do we reduce the risk, we're trying to figure out, is it a box, is it a bag, what's the cost, and those types of things. But ultimately, you're going to receive all of those things in one nice package as a true welcome to AARP. So now you're not calling the contact center saying, am I a member? I sent that information in, I got my gift bag, but I hadn't received my card. So am I in fact a member? And you're also having, hopefully, a better experience when it comes to the actual becoming a member of AARP, understanding what the benefits are. I'm going to wrap up there, but I think I have maybe 2 seconds or so to answer questions if there happen to be any. Yeah.
I was just curious if your experience in designing for customers has made its way into agile software development, because they seem to
Very
sort of
very
be at
similar.
odds.
Very similar. It's interesting you say that. So another project my team is working on, I certainly have plenty I could talk about. One is around a digital membership. So in talking to customers and understanding our new 50-plus customer, many of them want to interact digitally. And in that particular scenario, we're in the phase right now where we're designing what does that digital interaction look like. And we are using a more of an agile approach, as you can imagine, for creating all of those digital, both the app, the website, et cetera. So there's very much overlap. And the idea and thought behind agile and what we do in terms of iterating is very similar, which is put enough out there to get reaction, refine, and then go back and do it again. Very similar.
Honey, do you want us to take one? Okay.
Hi, it sounds like you have a really terrific program in place. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like initially socializing this idea, and especially dealing with, say, reluctant business units.
That would be Michelle. That's her job.
Yeah, so part of my role in strategy and governance also deals with culture change. And we have this affectionate term that we use internally. It's like, how do you tell somebody their baby is ugly, right? So you go to some, like, people love their programs, they love their products, and often when we show up, it's like the customer experience police, right? Like you're up to something that's wrong. So socialization is key. So I will say that. So before I ever start to talk about an opportunity area, I make sure to have a one-on-one conversation with the business unit owner. And then secondarily, and Salika's really instrumental in this, we pull them into, so those task force or those tiger teams that we create to tackle experience issues, we actually try really hard to put the business unit at the front of it. So change the narrative. So it's like, here's your opportunity to shine and to say, we went from X to Y. And you can be on the front lines here and we will sing your praises and give you the glory. And so we do that, and we've done that very successfully. Now, I will say, we do have an escalation track. So we have a steering committee and we have an executive sponsor. And so I can leverage both the steering committee and the executive sponsor if I can't come to some sort of resolution with that business unit.
Terrific, thank you.
Yeah. Last question.
Thank you. You talked about sentiment and capturing all the sentiment across your channels. My question is, how do you interpret sentiment? Because most of my friends who are turning 50 are freaking out and saying things like, thanks, AARP. So tell us how you know that doesn't mean thank you, AARP.
That's a great example. We actually have a program called Create the Good. And we had to say, how do we neutralize that so we're not just like, oh, that's an amazing program, it's so good. But we use Clara Bridge's text analytics system. And we actually have a team, and it's a pretty heavy investment. So they're constantly tweaking those models. And so we work with them to identify and interpret. So we start off with a baseline, but then we watch how it comes in. And if we see those types of things, we just correct it in the model. And so the algorithm is highly customized to AARP. So I think that's it for time. So thank you all so much. Thanks, Nani. Thank you.